It's now been 20 years since the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami, which claimed the lives of some 230,000 people.
You never replace the families that were lost, but people develop resilience.
Hundreds joined a candlelight vigil in Thailand to mark the anniversary. On December 26, 2004, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Indonesia triggered a massive tsunami that reached as far as East Africa. The tsunami was one of the worst natural disasters in modern history and displaced some 1.7 million people. 15 Canadians were killed, 6 others went missing. Well, let's bring in John Cassidy now, an earthquake seismologist at Natural Resources Canada. John, thanks for your time. 20 years has passed now, 2 decades. I think it's etched in the mind of so many people. I myself remember exactly where I was when I found out about this disaster. In the decades since, what lessons have been learned?
There have been a lot of really important lessons. The 2004 Sumatra earthquake was the first modern large, what we call subduction earthquake recorded by modern instruments. So learning about the faults, the ground shaking, the impacts, and the tsunami generation especially, and the importance of the tsunami. And we've seen that in large earthquakes since. One of the key things that we have in place now is tsunami warning systems around the globe, including the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean. So that was one of the key things missing at the time, and those warning systems for large tsunamis are now in place around the world.
So when you talk about that warning systems and those warning systems, how has the technology advanced since then? Is it better at detecting these events and being able to warn people before that they happen?
Yeah, exactly. It's both. It's both in terms of the technology for detecting and also for communicating and sharing that information very quickly around the world. So many of the people that were impacted by this tsunami in 2004 were thousands and thousands of kilometers away. They didn't feel shaking, so they didn't realize that one of these large earthquakes had occurred, and then the tsunami came ashore, which of course is a series of waves that continues for hours. It's not a single wave. But there was no warning in place at the time, and so people just weren't aware that this was headed their way. These tsunamis travel at about the same speed as a jet, so in many cases it took hours for this tsunami to travel across the Indian Ocean, for example.
It's not uncommon for earthquakes to trigger tsunami warnings. We've had a couple in the past few months. But they were cancelled soon after. So what is it about this earthquake, that 9.1 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Sumatra, and the subsequent tsunami that made it so powerful and so deadly?
Right, that's a great question. And we had a recent example off the California coast where a magnitude 7 earthquake occurred. At a 9.1, this earthquake off of Sumatra ruptured a fault that was 1,300 kilometers long. And the rocks along that fault zone moved at least 10 meters in many areas, and also a vertical movement. So the seafloor was actually lifted, or in some areas it dropped. But it's the vertical movement over such a huge area that generated that tsunami. So it produced 10 minutes of strong shaking in nearby communities. But for a large tsunami to be generated requires a very large earthquake, and at 9.1, 9.2, this was one of the world's largest earthquakes. Long fault, big movements, that's what starts the wave, and instruments that can detect that very quickly now and share that information.
John, I know it's difficult to predict the future, but given what we know, are we likely to see another event like this in our lifetime?
Yes, I would say so. Somewhere likely around the Pacific Ring of Fire. One of the things learned from this earthquake in Sumatra was how a large earthquake like this can trigger similar earthquakes, subduction earthquakes on adjacent parts of the fault zone. So this sort of cascading series of events that we saw in 2005, 2007 through the area. and also looking back at the history of earthquakes. A lot has been learned about the history of these large subduction earthquakes in Sumatra and also around the world, including here on the west coast of Canada, where we have similar types of earthquakes. They're rare events, but the last one of those, magnitude 9, was back in the year 1700. So the importance of looking back at the history and using the geological record, as well as modern instruments for measuring very subtle movements that nobody would feel, but we can monitor and study what's happening beneath our feet.
All right, John Cassidy is an earthquake seismologist at Natural Resources Canada. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much for chatting with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much.